Hey guys, I'm FatBuddyCat, and this is a mini dirt track racer. If you've learned anything about me, it's that I can't leave well enough alone. This mini bike is pretty great just as it sits. However, there are a couple things I think I can tweak to make it a little bit better. The first issue I'm having is the engine. I have a fully built 196 on here, and it is a lot of torque all the time. Right off the line, up the straightaway, in the corner, out of the corner. As soon as you hit the hornet release, the front end wants to come up. It floats and you can't steer. If you try to come down sideways, you have a tendency to grab the kickstand on the ground. But before the kickstand gets there, you have your chain and sprocket. I'm not sitting on this mini bike right now, but when I am, it comes down even lower. It doesn't take much to come up and make contact. This can be fixed with a different engine. We're building that. The rear end, well, it can be fixed with a bigger wheel and tire to match the front. We're going to try to bring it up a little bit using the same 10-inch steel split wheel. This one was set up for a sprocket when it was on the vintage mini bike. We're going to set it up for a sprocket again if it fits this mini bike. Quick update. I'm only 4 nuts away from having the engine and just about everything else removed. I think you know where I'm going with this. Right up on the workbench. Try to make it easy on a guy. Speaking of easy, we could, get a tape measure out and try to find what we have from the center of the axle to the back of this cross member and be all sciencey about it, but it'd be a lot easier if we just poke the axle out, bring the other wheel in, and stick this axle through temporarily. Then we'll really know. Unfortunately, we're going to have to trim the fender. Look at that. It's just barely catching my knobbies. That's an easy fix. What's not so easy is the bearing sitch. Up in the front, we have a 5/8 axle and 5/8 bearings. In the back, we have, right now, 5/8 bearings and a nice CT200U 15mm axle. What are we going to do here? I'll bang this fender out right quick. I'm just removing the lip. I cut straight across, and now I'm just going to take these little ears off. Maybe you can see it better. Yeah, from the side. See there? How it kicks back under? I'm going to take the rest of that off. Now we have a double pointer. Next is either the hangers or the wheels. I think it's going to be easier to do the wheels. I already have these holes bored out. These were a 12mm axle hole from the factory. I bored out for 15mm. I'm not quite 5/8. If I go 5/8 here, I would want to definitely reinforce the hangers, and I believe you would want to do it on the outside, at least on this side where we have the sprocket on the inside. The sprocket itself isn't going to be any further over because the torque converter and the chain is going to come back in the same exact place. We're just going to space it out from the wheel itself. We might have a hollow in the middle of the hub. It would be a whole lot easier if we could just put 15mm bearings in the rims and then keep this nice and lightweight. If it breaks in the future, I can just reinforce what's there. No matter what, I'm going to need another one of these hub adapters on the other side. One for the sprocket, the other for the rotor. So I just went ahead and installed one. The next thing I'm going to do is knock out these bearings. I came in ready for this, but didn't even need it. By the time I laid the bolt against the bearing, it popped right out. I'll flip the wheel over. I just have it on a couple 2x3s. Ta-da! You ready for this? The outside of the bearing with the 5/8 inside diameter that just came out of this rim has an outside diameter on this outside race of 34.93. I measured two of them. This bearing has a 15mm inside diameter, so it'll work with our axle that we're already using. However, it has an outside diameter on that outside trace of just about dead nuts 35mm. So if we have 35mm, and I have it written down because I would forget that, this is 34.93, we have to make up the difference. So it's 0.07mm. That's what I have to remove from this rim in order to use this bearing. Get my gloves, my goggles, my Dremel. I'm only going to be using sanding and polishing bits for this. It's such a small amount. If you went bang bang orangutan, you'd get it in there and you'd seize, well, you wouldn't seize it, but you'd impinge the bearing. You'd crush the bearing, basically. So you'd have to take something, and it's not a lot. It's hair. Maybe a couple hairs. Don't want to take too much. I do have, I think it's the red box, some heavy hitters in here as well. But hopefully those don't have to come out. I got about 10 minutes out of that sanding barrel. That's what that is. We call it 5 minutes on each side. I just got it real close to that outside race, not trace. I don't know why I say that sometimes. And then I got in there with a few steps of the sandpapes. I worked from that heavy grit to whatever that one is. Call it a rough polish. It's like machine fit. Just enough room for some grease. Speaking of grease, I just carefully removed the seals from these bearings and repack them with some red number 2. Okay, now we have an axle, our bearings, and our rim or wheel. Now we just need a spacer to go between the bearings so that we don't ming them up when we tighten the axle. This is, well, let's take a look. Black Schedule 40 pipe nipple, 2.5 inches long. This is a 5/8 shim or bushing. Where they get the 1/2 inch is beyond me, but both of these fit over the axle. This is just a piece of rubber hose that I'm going to put over our Schedule 40 pipe nipple, and that will help center it a little better on the inside. Hopefully this little guy will hang on. We'll be able to get it in there. These bearings are pretty easy to drop in, so I get an idea. I set one bearing in and let the axle go right on through. We'll flip this over, and now I'll start assembling my spacer, and I'll just feed it through on top of the axle. I just made a simple press to help get that Schedule 40 pipe nippler through the piece of hose. We'll slide that over the axle and right down inside. Next will be that little shim, and then the other bearing. Now I'll pull the axle out. Might have to give it a tap. My rubber mallet. I just have my fingers on the bearing. See, it didn't even come out, but just to make sure. Pull the axle out, make sure it goes back in. See how that rubber hose made it a lot easier? Now, I'm just going to tap the face on each side. Make sure that the outside race is seated. It still spins freely. We're good. Yeah, buddy. Back up on the workbench, I have the 10-inch wheel installed on this mini bike with the 15mm axle. Now we just have to center it. the sprocket and the brake rotor are going to be spaced off of the hubs, so we can do that from wherever it lands. I'm going to grab a tape measure and get a distance from the face of the bearing to the inside of the axle hanger. I'll then make that distance the same on both sides, and then we'll see where we are for center. Well, isn't that convenient? It actually worked out to 2.5 inches on both sides. 3 of these bad boys to do this whole thing. That makes it easy. The Coleman CC100 rear axle that I'm using is just a little bit too long. To make sure I get all the threads when I tighten it, I'll just slip on 1 5/8 collar before the nut. We're looking good from the front, looking back. We're in the middle of the frame. Lined up that tab for the fender. Looks like we have the same distance from the hub to the rear loop on both sides. That wasn't too bad. We're going to be jumping between the engine build and the chassis for this mini bike. We'll get that rotor on there real soon. Have a good night, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.
I want you to stay. I want you to stay. I want you to stay. I want you to stay.